Maddie Miles here. Welcome back to What the Health is Going On. As you all know from last time, we are discussing social movements. Just to sum up last episode, we discussed what a health social movement was and what the different subtypes were, which are embodied, constituency-based, and health access movements. We discussed how the LGBTQ community was severely discriminated against only 40 years ago. Only 4 decades ago, gay marriage was illegal in 23 states, almost half the nation. As we discussed, this population was susceptible to the AIDS epidemic that was happening. At the hand of a government who did nothing to stop it, tens of thousands of gay men died with no cure or treatment. This episode, we are carrying from that information, but we are going to highlight more on things that are happening today. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Gay marriage is legal in the United States now, and there are plenty of resources, and it is much more widely accepted. But this isn't completely true, and here's why. There are many LGBTQ social movements happening today. These are organized around the acceptance and rights of people who might identify in this community today. We are going to dive in the past again for a split second. Back 100 years ago, there were very few, if any, organizations or resources for people in the LGBTQ community. People who belonged to this community did not dare come out since it was dangerous. Dating back hundreds of years, LGBT people have been persecuted by the church, state, and medical authorities. People who deviated from stereotypical gender roles or straight sexuality were seen as evil. This condemnation has been seen through sensational public trials, exile, medical warnings, and in church teachings. This persecution has given LGBTQ people a very negative and unfair perception. But with the help of organized social movements, public media, and the progression of human rights, the way the LGBTQ community is perceived is changing, and there is a movement for a culture of understanding. Like I said, we are trying to move towards a culture of understanding, but this doesn't mean that the world is perfect and that everyone is on board. Only 2 years ago, in June 2016, one of the deadliest shootings in U.S. history took place. It was the deadliest terrorist attack since 2011 and killed 49 people, targeting members of the LGBTQ community. Listen to this interview from New York Times with survivor Nick Hosting, who is at Pulse nightclub the night that terrible event happened.
Never in my life did I think I would wake up to, basically history being written right there. One of the most horrific events since 9/11. I was staying at my friend's house, which was, about 100 meters away from Pulse. Said around 2 o'clock is when I heard the first gunshots go off, and, there's probably a dozen and a half, 2 dozen shots that I heard. And that's when, people started screaming, running from the club. I looked out the window and it was just a sea of blue and red light. More cop cars than I've ever seen in one place at a time.
That tragic account really puts it into perspective of what people in that community may go through day to day. This tragic event just highlights the need for continued love, acceptance, and understanding. If you are still struggling to understand what I'm trying to get across here, think about 9/11 and what happened. Where were you? What did you feel? Think about how horrible it was to know that the United States was being targeted for their beliefs. Now imagine doing the same to another person different from you. Imagine being the terrorist, but you target gay and lesbian people. Do you see the connection? A recent law that discriminated against the LGBTQ community was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This policy is put in place by the Clinton administration and forced members of the military to keep their sexual identity a secret. If they were outed, they could immediately lose their job. Therefore, the name Don't Ask, Don't Tell was created. Listen to this video as members of the U.S. military explain what it was like to give so much of themselves to a job that did not love them back. Thankfully, this ended up being repealed by President Barack Obama in 2011.
On September 11th, on that morning, I had gone down to the Pentagon for a meeting. The meeting adjourned at 9:30, and I was at the bus stop when the plane hit the Pentagon. As it turned out, the space I was in 7 minutes earlier was completely destroyed, and 7 of my co-workers were killed. I realized that if I had been killed, my partner would have quite literally been the last to know because I was unable to put her name in any of my emergency contact information. The events of September 11th made us realize that we really were making a much bigger sacrifice because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Living under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, quite literally, she didn't exist.
Living under Don't Ask, Don't Tell is something that you can't put into words, really. I mean, you give up so much of yourself in order to pursue a job that you love. You're giving up relationships, you're willing to lie to people. It's a landmine. It's a field full of landmines.
For example, when the Admiral would call me to his office, this little voice in the back would always say, gee, I hope that somehow I haven't been outed and that he's calling me in to tell me that my career is over.
The wording of it is really misleading because it makes people think that under the policy you can be gay, lesbian, or bisexual and serve, but just not talk about it. But it's a lot more than that.
Don't Ask, Don't Tell also meant I would lead a very empty life by myself to be able to follow the law.
You basically end up living two lives, which is awful.
My last assignment was as the commanding general of the 94th Regional Readiness Command, and the principal function of the 94th was to prepare soldiers to deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan. In my professional judgment as an old, straight, bald guy who spent 35 years in the military, Don't Ask, Don't Tell actually takes away from military readiness. You have critical, very, very difficult to fill military occupation specialties where we discharged fully qualified, fully trained combat veterans who are exactly what the military wanted, simply because we had a Don't Ask, Don't Tell law on the books, which most of the military thought didn't make sense.
I was the top recruiter in the Army. Throughout the years I had been in the military, I had been promoted 7 times. Actually, as I was being discharged from the Army for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, my commander was very forthright in his view that I should still be promoted ahead of my peers and that I would be an asset to the Army even though I was gay.
As I progressed in my career, I moved relatively quickly, and I kind of had to weigh whether or not living up to the Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment and living under Don't Ask, Don't Tell were compatible. I wrote a letter to my commanding officer letting him know what the situation was and was discharged.
We are not a nation that says don't ask, don't tell. We are a nation that says out of many, we are one. We are a nation that welcomes the service of every patriot. We are a nation that believes that all men and women are created equal. Those are the ideals that generations have fought for. Those are the ideals that we uphold today. And now it is my honor to sign this bill into law.
Could you imagine dedicating your entire life to your country and having to worry if the love of your life was going to be okay if you didn't come home? They were not allowed to share your benefits. You were not even allowed to list your partner as an emergency contact in fear of being outed and losing your job. This was just one way the LGBT community was discriminated against. As you all know, my interest is healthcare. More recently, the ethical debate has come up. Can a doctor refuse medical treatment due to moral obligations? This is something many people argue, whether or not a provider should be able to refuse to give treatment if it violates their personal values or religion. You can think about this in a few different ways. The first way is the obvious one, that doctors should not be able to refuse to help people. They signed up for that job and they have a moral obligation to follow the medical code of ethics to help sick people. The second way is that doctors are entitled to treat who they want. As businesses have a right to refuse customers, doctors do too. The third way is a little more gray and not so black and white. If you were an LGBT person, would you want to receive treatment from a doctor that didn't want to help you? I'd be taking my business somewhere else. The Trump administration has rocked the boat with this debate. The Department of Health and Human Services is adding a division of conscious and religious freedom to protect doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers who refuse to take part in some kind of care because of moral or religious obligations. This could not only put the LGBT community at risk, but also other segments of the population. For example, like women seeking contraception, like birth control or abortion services. A year ago, President Trump also made tweets regarding the idea of banning transgender people from serving in the military in order to reduce military cost and spending. This idea sparked debate amongst the country. Listen to this CBS interview with transgender Captain Terrence Robertson of the Minnesota National Guard as he discusses how this potential ban would affect him and others like him.
It is unclear how the president's announcement could affect transgender people who are currently serving in the military. One of those being Captain Terrence Robertson of Minnesota's National Guard. And he's joining me now from Minneapolis. Thank you so much for joining me, Captain. You are coming up on your 12th year anniversary in the military. You served a tour of duty in Afghanistan. You are returning home yesterday and you see these tweets from the president. What did you think?
I didn't know what to think. I stepped off the plane and turned my phone on, and I was getting bombarded from friends and family, and a lot of people just asking, what's going on? What does this mean? How does this affect you? And I think the first thing that I thought was, what is going on? I was confused myself, and then that kind of turned into being angry, frustrated, and scared.
Scared? Why scared?
Because this is my job, this is my life, this is part of my livelihood. I've served honorably for the last 12 years, and to now be put into a position of being uncertain of what might happen next, that would put fear in anybody, I think.
Yeah. We should tell everybody you were returning from your annual training, 2 weeks of annual training, when you found out about this. Enlisting transgender individuals and having taxpayers pay for their medical transition has been at the heart of a political debate in Washington. While we were all talking about a lot of other things, some lawmakers were discussing this. President Trump used that to support his decision to reinstate the ban on transgender people. Do you buy that argument that taxpayers should not be paying for the medical transition of somebody like you?
Well, and I can only speak from my own experience, but in undergoing gender transition, I haven't had anybody pay for me to receive medical care or my surgery. I've paid for everything out of my own pocket.
Mm-hmm. But the issue has been, this is just going to cost us more money that we really shouldn't. You know, in your case, you paid for it out of pocket, but the argument is that taxpayers shouldn't be paying for this.
Right, and you know, there's a lot of transgender people that decide to not undergo any sort of surgery or take hormones or anything like that. You know, there are very few people that actually do go through with that for a variety of own reasons, personal, medical, and of that sort.
You've been in the military for 12 years. How has being transgender impacted your time in the military?
Well, I mean, it really hasn't. I've had nothing but support all the way up and down my chain of command from the soldiers that I'm in charge of as being a company commander, and it hasn't had an impact whatsoever on my unit or the organization.
So if you could talk to the president today about this issue, what are the main highlights you'd want to get across to him? What does he need to know?
I think he needs to know that this is going to affect a lot of people. I can't imagine how they're going to try to solve the problem of getting people to replace all the people that are transgender in the military currently, being that we are struggling right now so much as it is to try to build our numbers up and get our strength up in the military, and then to think of all of us just being asked or told that we can no longer serve. I don't know what that means for the future of our military.
Have you talked to other people who are transgender and serving?
Yes, I mean, not over the telephone. We've been communicating via email and on social media. There's a large group of people that are in the same position right now that are scared, that just don't know what to think or what this means for our future in the military.
You know, there are other people who, you know, have argued that perhaps the president is trying to reach out to his more conservative base by doing something like this. You know, what do you want, not just the president, but others out there, to know about your service, your commitment to this country?
Right. I can't think of a single person that decides to join the Army or the military, any branch of service, on a whim. We all want to do something that is much larger than ourselves and contribute in a way, and are extremely patriotic and hardworking people. and to think of people judging us by happening to be transgender, that shouldn't make any difference on our ability to serve, and it doesn't make any difference on our ability to serve. We all carry out our jobs and do our duties every single day, and this isn't going to stop me from continuing to show up, continuing to do my job. I have never missed a training as a result of being transgender. This hasn't impacted my ability to serve, and I've fulfilled my obligations over the last 12 years.
Captain Terrence Robertson, thank you for talking to us, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I pointed out earlier what Don't Ask, Don't Tell was and how it affected people. Now I'm pointing out the possibility of banning transgender people from the military and how it could affect the LGBTQ community as well. Lots of times, we make judgment without knowing the hard, real facts. No matter what you think, I think that we can all agree that the LGBTQ community has been through a lot. From terrorist attacks to unfair laws, they deserve better. I challenge you to get to know someone before you judge them. We've made a lot of progress in the last 50 years, but there is still a lot more ground to cover. I'm Maddie Miles, and thanks for listening to What the Health is Going On. Special thanks to CBS News, New York Times, American Psychology Journal, BarackObama.com YouTube channel, CNN News, and our mentor, Dr. Robin Brown. Tune in next time.